Today we're going to make some little pasties, kind of inspired by Spanish empanadas, but with a different kind of filling, based on lentils and bacon. Ingredients I've got here: 150 grams of lentils, a few carrots, garlic, red pepper, a sweet onion, a can of tomatoes, a stick of celery, 3 rashers of smoked streaky bacon. Then I've got some sweet paprika, some vegetable stock powder, saffron and cumin. And I've got some herbs here I picked from my herb garden. I've got thyme, rosemary, sage, bay and savory. Savory is really good with pulses. Right, let's get started. First thing to do is to fire roast this red pepper. Not strictly necessary, but it'll add to the flavours. I'm doing this in my garage because I don't want to set the smoke alarms off. I've got a carving fork here and I'm just going to jam that inside the red pepper. And then blowtorch. This is not a chefy blowtorch. This is one I bought for plumbing, but same difference. And we'll just light that up. And as you can see, I'm just going all over the skin of the pepper here. I've been over that once with the torch. I'm going to go over again until it's completely black. You can see that that skin that was a kind of tan colour, I'm just going to torch it until it actually goes black. That's sufficiently toasted. So that goes into a plastic bag. I'm just going to let it sit in its own steam. And that will help to loosen up that burnt skin on there. And while that's happening, we'll go and start on the prep for the other parts. The other thing I want to get a head start on is just to get this saffron infusing in some water. You don't have to use saffron, I just quite like it. It's kind of looks like red string. So I'm just going to put a few strands of saffron in there, not too much. This saffron's not the best quality, but it is genuine saffron. Okay, and we're just going to leave that in half a cup of water there to infuse while we prepare the other ingredients. I don't often buy sweet onions, but I just fancied a change, so we'll give that a try today. So the onion I'm just going to dice up fairly small. We don't need to add any oil or butter or anything like that because this streaky bacon's got a fair bit of fat in it which will render out, and we're going to use that instead of oil for cooking the vegetables in. So as soon as we got a little bit of fat out of that bacon, I'm just going to move it to one side and then go the onions. Meanwhile, my stalk of celery, I'm going to chop up into smallish dice. If you don't like celery, but you've only ever had it raw, I would suggest trying it cooked because it is a different vegetable when it's cooked. These carrots are quite nice, so I'm just going to scrape them rather than completely peeling them. Just scrape off the bits that look a bit less nice. And again, with these carrots, I'm going to aim for smallish dice. That bacon is coming out for just a moment. Then the celery and carrots in. So what's happening over there is a bit like sofrito or mirepoix. And the reason I took this bacon out is I just find bacon is easier to cut up into neat little pieces if it's partly cooked. And then that will go back in with the vegetables. It's time to get the herbs in as well, so I'm just going to pull off those leaves of thyme. Same with the rosemary. Same with the savory, which looks a lot like rosemary, but it's a bit more of a delicate herb. Similar kind of flavour, I suppose. Often it's called bean herb. And somebody told me that actually it's believed to have some effect on the digestive system that alleviates some of that side effect that you get with beans and pulses. You know the side effect I'm talking about, don't you? And then the sage, well, the sage hardly needs anything removed, just a little bit of thick stalk there. And we'll just chop those up a little bit to help release the flavours. I think because I actually happen to have it on the windowsill, I'm going to throw in a bit of basil as well. Because we've got tomatoes in this dish, and tomatoes and basil in a fine combination. While that's just gently cooking, those herbs will go in there. A lot of the flavours in aromatic herbs are oil soluble, so they will work with the fat that's coming out of the bacon and dissolve out into the mix. I'm cooking this ever so gently because I don't want to burn anything. I just want it to cook down and caramelise a little bit and just lose some of its moisture, I think. Also at this point we'll chuck in a couple of cloves of garlic, and I'm not going to do anything fancy with these. I will just chop them into small pieces. And that's now going to go into the vegetables. That gives it enough time to cook, but it's not going in the pan on its own. It's got other things to prevent it from burning. That's the red pepper we fire roasted earlier. And what we should now find is, yeah, that skin just scrapes off quite cleanly. If fire roasting peppers is a bit of a faff for you, you can buy these in jars, or you could just put the pepper in as it is. The advantage of taking the skin off like this and fire roasting it is that some people have digestive issues with red peppers, and it's often to do with the skin, which is bitter. So scraping it off like this, and you do get all of it off, you lose that bitterness, and all you're left with is very, very sweet, delicious pepper. It also imparts a kind of barbecue flavour. I'm just going to lose that pith and seeds, just because, not because they're hot, they're not hot, but because they're unpleasantly gritty. And then this pepper, it's really tender now. It's actually quite different from, you can see how floppy it's gone. It's not exactly cooked, and I find that roasting it with the blowtorch like that brings out a real sweetness in the pepper. That's going to go in the pan with the rest of the vegetables. These vegetables are very nearly done now, and I'm just going to put in about a quarter of a teaspoon, maybe a half a level teaspoon of ground cumin. I'm also going to put in a generous heaped teaspoon of sweet paprika. Not smoked paprika. You could use smoked paprika, but I've got smoky bacon and I've got those fire roasted peppers in here. And then I'm just going to make sure that those spices have had a little bit of a chance to fry and cook. Vegetables are more or less where I want to get them. You can see a lot of the moisture's been driven off. We are going to add liquid to this, but I wanted these vegetables to cook and sweeten a little bit and caramelise, and then we can add the liquid back. So now, bay leaves are going to go in, the lentils are going to go in, and I have sifted through these. That's why they're in this bowl. I've sifted through for any foreign bodies, didn't find anything. The water with the saffron in it, and a can of chopped tomatoes. I'm going to add some of this vegetable bouillon powder. I'm going to add about a teaspoon and a half of it in there. This is a relatively low salt stock, so I'm also going to have about half a teaspoonful of this Dynamite Marmite, which has got a bit of chilli in it as well, which I think will just go well with these flavours. If you've no idea what Marmite is, there is another video for that. It will be in this card or in the video description. I think we're going to need a little bit more water. The amount of water is kind of variable depending on how much water comes out of your vegetables and how much cooks into the lentils. So there's probably about a cup and a half of water. Now we could just put a lid on that, let that simmer really, really gently until those lentils are cooked, but I'm going to put it in a slow cooker so I can go off and do something else. This is a small slow cooker. I have actually got two slow cookers. That's not extravagant. This is one we had when we were first married and it was just the two of us. But now the kids have grown up and left home, it's kind of just the two of us again. Okay, just make sure we've got everything out of that pan into the slow cooker. As I say, you could just simmer this in a saucepan until the lentils are tender and cooked, but I want to just leave it unattended while I go off and do something else. It looks a bit on the dry side, so again, a little bit more water. That's the consistency we're looking to start with, kind of a little bit soupy. Lid on, low heat, and we'll leave that for a couple of hours until those lentils are soft and tender. Okay, these have been going for about 5 hours, and you can see the lentils have all soaked up a lot of that liquid. Just going to taste for seasoning and the tenderness of the lentils, obviously. Absolutely spot on. So I'm just going to turn that off, going to let that cool, and tomorrow I'm going to make some pastry and make this into some little empanada type, pasty type of things. The morning after, this has now fully cooled down in the fridge overnight, and this is my lentil mixture, and it's nicely firm at the same time as being still slightly moist, but it's not swimming in liquid. Getting the liquid level right for this is a little bit hit and miss because the lentils may or may not absorb less or more water. So if you find your mixture is a little bit wet, you can just push it to the side like that and you'll find that the liquid will collect in the edge, and then you can spoon away the more solid lentil mixture. I've got 350 grams of plain flour here, and I'm going to put in about half a teaspoonful of cayenne pepper and about the same amount of smoked paprika. I'm using the smoked paprika here just to give a bit more flavour in the crust. I want this pastry to be a sort of reddish orangey colour when it's baked. So we'll just give that a mix through to distribute those spices into the flour. I've got 150 grams of butter. This is my Polish butter that I've got here, and I'm going to cut this into small cubes just to make it easier to mix through. And this is quite a lot of butter, but it's going to be nice. It's going to be a really short crust. Now we need to combine that fat with the flour. Now you can just get in there with your fingers and rub it together just with fingertips. I've got this, which is a pastry blender, and it actually makes the whole job a bit quicker, easier and cleaner on the fingers. And all it is, it's just a bunch of parallel blades that cut through the fat repeatedly. So we've got a kind of breadcrumb type of texture going on in this flour now. There are some visible chunks of butter still remaining, but we'll stop about there. I've got 75 grams of mature cheddar cheese here, so I'm just going to grate that up. I'm just going to plonk that in there. And I don't want to blend this, I don't want to lose those strands of cheese, so I'm just going to do this with my fingers, just kind of fold it in. Inevitably somebody will say, where's the salt in this dough? Well, it's in the cheese. Cheddar cheese has actually got salt in it, so I'm going to leave that at that. I'm not going to add any extra salt to this dough. So now it's time to bring that together into a ball of dough that we can roll out and work. And for that I'm going to use cold water, but also, and don't hate me, a good squirt of tomato ketchup. Tomato ketchup is, after all, just tomatoes, sugar and vinegar. I'm actually going to add a bit more. And a little splash of water, not very much. And we will now see that, firstly, my bowl is a bit too small for what I'm doing here, but we'll see this all start to come together into a dough in a moment. Right, I'm going to get my hands in there now and start working that together. But it's important not to kind of knead, really. We're just squeezing. We're getting to a point now where, yeah, that's going to come together into a ball of dough. Got my silicone pastry surface now, and I'm just going to turn this all out onto that. And I will just have to work this a tiny bit more, just to get those dry bits to combine in. But I don't want to knead it too much, or we'll lose that kind of mottled, cheesy texture we've got in there. The cheese is still in distinct strands in the dough, and I want to try to keep it that way. And I'm not kneading in the same way as I would bread here. I'm really just kind of squeezing it together. Now I need to kind of estimate how much dough I'm going to need for each little pasty. I think this is probably enough here to make 6. Actually, I think it's going to be 5. So I think we need about that much dough. Yeah. So that made enough for 5 little pasties of the size that I'm envisioning here. Next I'm going to roll that into a nice little ball, and then we'll have a bit of flour on the surface, and we'll roll this out into a nice neat circle. So I'm being quite gentle. Okay, not quite a circle, but close enough. And we could trim that to be perfectly circular, but I don't think we need to. Now I'm just going to spoon on a big chunk of this lentil filling. That seems about the right amount. I'm going to brush all the way around the edge here with water to help this stick to itself. And then bring that over the top and seal it all the way around there like that. Now is the time I can cut off this untidy edge. We might have enough dough at the end to make another whole one. So with an empanada, normally this would just be crimped with a fork here, and you can do that, but I want to have a nice little turned crimp here. just to make it look more like a pasty that we're accustomed to here in the UK. So, just gonna turn the crimp inwards like this. I'm just turning that with the tip of my finger to make a little crimp. Now carefully transfer that onto a baking tray, and we'll just make the others and then finish off. So that made 6 little pasties, well actually 6.1. I'm going to put these in the fridge now to rest for a little while before I bake them. I've also got a little bit of my lentil mixture left over here. That won't go to waste. I'll put that in the fridge and we'll make a soup or something out of that sometime. Those have been in the fridge for about 25 minutes now, and the pastry has actually firmed up. The reason I chilled the pastry after assembling is because it's just easier to do the crimps and roll out when the pastry is nice and soft and fresh. And then the chilling in the fridge when it's an assembled pasty helps those crimps to actually bond together and seal. That's the theory. I am still expecting that one or more of these will burst in the oven. The oven's preheating to 200 Celsius, and while we're just waiting for that to happen, I'm gonna wash the top of these with egg. I don't often use egg wash because when I'm baking smaller batches of things, it often seems like a bit of a waste to crack an egg. So often I will use milk instead, but it doesn't give you the shiny, glossy crust that you get from a proper egg wash. And then just before we put them in the oven, I'm just going to poke a couple of little vents in each one so the steam can come out here instead of bursting them open. Those are going to go into the oven at 200 Celsius for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll check on them. Right, that's our 25 minutes. I would say those need about another 10 minutes. But what I'm going to do, yeah, those are not looking too great. But those were reconstituted from the scraps of pastry, and you can see what's happened there. Anyway, I'm just going to redistribute these so that we get a chance. It is a fan oven, but nothing's perfect. I'm actually just going to turn that one around so those get a chance to cook. Anyway, just going to give that another 10 minutes, I think, and hopefully they will be really nice and golden. Right, those at the bottom there. So those 4 are done. And I'm not going to cook them any longer than that because you can see the filling is starting to bubble out the holes there. So that's good. Those, I don't know, a couple more minutes maybe. We'll see how they go. Now the tray is cool enough to handle, you can just slide those off onto the cooling rack. The underside of the pastry is really quite delicate, and if it was left on the tray like that, it would steam and it might go a little bit soggy. So that's the reason for putting them on a rack. The others here that I made from the scraps of pastry that I re-rolled, they're a little bit unsightly. They'll be just as delicious, I'm sure, but yeah, they're just not quite so photogenic, so we won't use those in the thumbnail. British weather being what it is, we just about had time to finish our pasties before the rain set in. We had to scurry back to the car and then drink our coffee, watching the waves and rain beat on the windscreen. Still, it got us out of the house. The 2 more intact remaining pasties I will freeze, and we'll have those next week or something. And the 2 that are a bit beaten up, well, let's have a look at one of them now. So still ever so slightly warm from the cooking, and we've got a nice crisp crust on there, nicely baked even at the bottom actually, fully cooked sort of soft pastry on the bottom there, and crumbly flaky pastry on top. So really nice, and that filling's just nice and moist without being runny or watery. The flavour is just really superb. I have discovered I really like red split lentils, but when they're cooked together with all these herbs and vegetables and flavourings, they're just amazing. You can taste the saffron, you can taste all of the spices in there, and the cheese has given the crust this lovely sort of flakiness. Yep, super happy with that. Of course, there's lots of variations you could do on this. You could put chicken in there or tuna, little chunks of chorizo, all sorts of things. Interested to hear about your suggestions for variations and adaptations of this recipe. Let me know in the comments. For now, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.